In a quiet little town surrounded by green hills and sparkling water, there lived a woman who had just moved into her dream home. This wasn't any ordinary house, it was a cozy cabin right by the lake, with big windows that let in sunlight during the day and gave her an amazing view of the stars at night. She had worked hard for years to save up enough money to buy this place, and now it was finally hers. The woman loved everything about her new home: the fresh air, the sound of birds chirping in the morning, and even the way the wind rustled through the trees. It felt like a perfect escape from the busy life she led back in the city. But what she didn't know yet was that living here would bring its own set of challenges she never expected when she signed the papers to buy the property. Not long after moving in, she started noticing something odd. Most of the houses around the lake were part of a group called the Lakeview Homeowners Association, or HOA for short. The HOA was responsible for keeping things nice and tidy, making sure the shared dock was clean, organizing events for neighbors, and deciding how everyone's lawns should look. They also collected monthly fees from members to pay for all these things. But here's the thing, her house wasn't actually part of the HOA. Because of some old zoning rules, her property fell outside their official boundaries. That meant she didn't have to follow their rules or pay their fees. At first, this seemed like great news to her. After all, why spend extra money if you don't have to? Plus, she liked the idea of having more freedom to do what she wanted with her own space. However, as soon as word got out that she wasn't planning to join the HOA, trouble began brewing. One neighbor, in particular, took notice: a woman who lived 2 doors down. Let's call her Karen. Karen was known around the neighborhood for being very involved in the HOA. In fact, she was the president of the group, and she took her role extremely seriously. Some might say too seriously. Karen believed strongly in rules, not just following them but making sure everyone else did too. If someone's mailbox was crooked, Karen would leave a note reminding them to fix it. If someone parked their car on the grass instead of the driveway, Karen wouldn't hesitate to march over and give them a lecture. And heaven forbid anyone dare skip the annual HOA dues. Karen saw herself as the guardian of the community, ensuring that everything stayed picture perfect. When Karen heard that the new neighbor wasn't going to join the HOA, she decided to take action. First, she sent a friendly letter welcoming the woman to the neighborhood. It was polite on the surface, but between the lines, it was clear Karen was hinting that joining the HOA was practically mandatory. "We'd love to see you at our next meeting," the note said, along with details about membership fees and benefits. The woman appreciated the gesture but politely declined. She explained that she couldn't afford the extra expense right now and hoped people would understand. To her surprise, Karen didn't stop there. Over the next few days, Karen showed up unannounced several times, bringing cookies one day, offering advice about gardening another, and always steering the conversation back to the HOA. Each time, the woman remained calm and firm, repeating the same message: she wasn't interested in joining. But Karen couldn't accept no for an answer. How could anyone refuse to be part of such a wonderful organization? Surely, she thought, there must be some way to convince her stubborn new neighbor. As weeks passed, Karen grew increasingly frustrated. Her usual charm and persistence weren't working, which was unusual for her. Normally, people either joined willingly or gave in eventually because they didn't want to deal with her constant reminders. But this woman was different. She stood her ground without raising her voice or causing drama, which only made Karen more determined to find a solution. And so, what started as a simple disagreement over membership slowly turned into something bigger. Little did Karen know, though, that this new neighbor had secrets of her own secrets that would change everything once they came to light. For now, however, the stage was set for a showdown neither of them could have predicted. As the days went by, Karen's frustration with the new neighbor grew stronger. She couldn't understand why someone would willingly choose to live near their perfect little lake community but refuse to be part of the group that kept it running smoothly. To her, it felt like a slap in the face, a rejection of everything she worked so hard to maintain. And Karen didn't take rejection lightly. At first, she tried subtler ways to push the issue. She left notes on the new neighbor's mailbox, each one sweeter than the last but laced with thinly veiled criticism. "Your grass looks a little long," one note read. "Our neighborhood standards are important." Another said, "Please remember to keep your trash cans out of sight, they really affect curb appeal." These messages were polite enough not to seem outright hostile, but anyone could tell they carried an edge. The new neighbor noticed these notes and rolled her eyes. She knew exactly what Karen was doing, trying to guilt her into joining the HOA. But instead of arguing or getting upset, she chose to ignore them. After all, she wasn't breaking any laws or causing problems for anyone else. Her yard might not look like a magazine cover, but it was clean and tidy enough. If Karen wanted perfection, maybe she should focus on her own lawn instead. But ignoring the notes only made Karen dig deeper. One sunny Saturday morning, the new neighbor woke up early to enjoy a cup of coffee on her porch. As she stepped outside, she froze. Someone had spray-painted bright orange letters on several trees near her driveway. The words screamed out, "Private property, no trespassing by HOA members." Her heart sank as she stared at the vandalism. It was clear who was behind this. No one else in the neighborhood had shown such animosity toward her since she moved in. Only Karen had been persistent and increasingly aggressive in trying to get her to join the HOA. This act felt personal, mean-spirited, and completely unnecessary. Feeling angry but determined not to let this ruin her day, the new neighbor called the local police department. Officers arrived within the hour, taking photos of the painted trees and jotting down details. They promised to investigate but warned her that without solid evidence pointing to a specific person, it might be hard to prove who did it. Still, filing a report was better than doing nothing. Word spread quickly among the neighbors about the incident. Most people were shocked and appalled. A few even approached the new neighbor to express sympathy and offer support. Privately, some admitted they'd grown tired of Karen's controlling behavior over the years but never dared to speak up. Now, seeing how far she'd gone to harass someone just for refusing to join the HOA, they began questioning whether her leadership style was truly beneficial for the community. Despite the growing whispers, Karen doubled down. Determined to make the new neighbor's life difficult, she escalated her tactics even further. A few days later, the woman came home from work to find a sheriff's deputy waiting outside her gate. Confused and alarmed, she pulled over and asked what was going on. The officer explained that someone had filed a complaint alleging she was operating an illegal bed and breakfast business out of her home. According to the report, there had been complaints about excessive foot traffic and unauthorized guests frequenting the property. The accusations sounded absurd to her. Sure, her teenage son often invited friends over after school, and occasionally family members visited on weekends, but nothing remotely close to running a business. It didn't take long for her to figure out who was behind the false report. Who else would stoop so low as to call the authorities based on flimsy rumors? Karen's desperation to force her hand was becoming laughable if it weren't so infuriating. Instead of letting the situation overwhelm her, the new neighbor decided to stay calm and handle things maturely. She invited the deputy inside, showed him around the house, and explained her living arrangements clearly. There was no sign of any commercial activity, not even an Airbnb listing online. By the time the officer left, it was obvious the complaint had no merit. Still, the experience left her shaken. She hadn't expected things to escalate this far. Was Karen really willing to go to such lengths just because she refused to pay monthly dues? It seemed unbelievable, but here they were. What the new neighbor didn't realize yet was that Karen's actions were about to backfire spectacularly. Unbeknownst to everyone, including Karen herself, the new neighbor held a secret that would flip the entire dynamic upside down. For now, though, Karen continued her campaign of harassment, convinced that sooner or later, her target would cave under the pressure. Meanwhile, the new neighbor started thinking differently about how to deal with the situation. Ignoring Karen's antics clearly wasn't working anymore. Something needed to change, but what? How could she stand up for herself without stooping to Karen's level? Little did either of them know, the answer lay hidden in plain sight. All it would take was one moment of truth to turn the tables completely. Until then, tension simmered beneath the surface, threatening to boil over at any moment. The tension between the new neighbor and Karen had reached a boiling point. The vandalism, the false police reports, the constant harassment, it was all adding up, and the new neighbor had had enough. She wasn't the type to sit back and let someone walk all over her, but she also didn't want to escalate things unnecessarily. Still, something inside her snapped when she realized how far Karen was willing to go just to force her into joining the HOA. It was time for Karen to learn that playing games with her might not be the smartest move. What Karen didn't know, and what no one else in the neighborhood suspected, was that the new neighbor wasn't just another lakeside resident trying to blend in. She was a savvy real estate investor who specialized in acquiring undervalued properties and strategically holding onto them for future opportunities. Before purchasing her cozy lakefront home, she had quietly bought several key parcels of land around the development. And here's the kicker, one of those parcels happened to include the very lot where Karen's house stood. This wasn't some random coincidence. The new neighbor had done her homework before buying anything. She knew the area well and understood its potential for growth. By acquiring these properties through a shell company, a legal way to keep ownership anonymous, she ensured that no one would connect the dots until she decided it was time to reveal her hand. Until now, she hadn't planned to use this information as leverage. But Karen's relentless behavior left her with little choice. One evening, the HOA held an emergency meeting to discuss non-compliant residents. Word had spread about the spray-painted trees and the bogus bed and breakfast complaint, and many members were curious or concerned about what was happening. The new neighbor, who hadn't been invited, walked into the meeting unannounced. Her sudden appearance caused a stir, and all eyes turned to her as she stood tall at the front of the room. Karen, sitting confidently at the head of the table, looked surprised but quickly masked her expression. She probably thought the new neighbor was there to beg forgiveness or finally agree to join the HOA. Instead, the woman dropped a bombshell that sent shockwaves through the room. "I think it's important we clear the air," she began calmly, addressing the group. "Some of you may have heard rumors about issues between me and certain members of this association. I've tried to stay out of conflict, but recent events have made that impossible." She paused, letting her words sink in. Then, without missing a beat, she continued. "Before I purchased my home here, I invested in several properties surrounding this development. These include lots that are critical to maintaining the integrity of this community. One of them, in fact, happens to be the parcel of land where Karen's house is located." The room fell silent. For a moment, no one dared to breathe. Karen's face turned pale as realization dawned on her. She opened her mouth to say something but couldn't find the words. Other neighbors exchanged nervous glances, unsure whether to believe what they'd just heard. To prove her point, the new neighbor pulled out a folder filled with documents, property deeds, purchase agreements, zoning permits, all neatly organized and ready to present. She handed copies to Karen and a few key HOA members, inviting them to verify the details themselves. There was no denying it, the evidence was undeniable. "You see," the woman said, her tone firm but measured, "I never intended to use this information against anyone. But given the hostility and baseless accusations directed at me, I feel it's necessary to clarify my position. If forced to, I could pursue rezoning applications or explore other options that might significantly alter the landscape of this community." Her statement hung heavy in the air. Everyone understood the implications. Rezoning could mean turning parts of their pristine neighborhood into commercial spaces, disrupting the peaceful atmosphere they cherished. No one wanted that, not even Karen. For the first time since becoming HOA president, Karen found herself speechless. All her confidence, her authority, her carefully constructed image of control, it crumbled in an instant. She looked around the room, hoping for support, but most people avoided her gaze. Some even nodded subtly, agreeing with the new neighbor's points. After years of ruling with an iron fist, Karen had finally met her match. Realizing she had no choice but to retreat, Karen mumbled something about needing fresh air and bolted out of the meeting. The other neighbors lingered for a while, discussing what had just unfolded. Many felt relieved that someone had finally stood up to Karen's bullying tactics. Others worried about the potential consequences if the new neighbor followed through on her threats. But overall, there was a sense of hope that maybe, just maybe, this could lead to positive change. Later that week, Karen mustered the courage to reach out privately. She knocked on the new neighbor's door late one afternoon, looking more vulnerable than anyone had ever seen her. Gone was the confident, domineering persona she usually projected. In its place was a woman who seemed genuinely shaken. "I owe you an apology," Karen said after a long pause. I acted out of fear. Fear of losing control, of seeing our community change in ways I can't predict. I let that fear cloud my judgment, and I took things too far." The new neighbor listened patiently, studying Karen's face. She could tell the apology was sincere, though it came late. After a moment, she replied, "I get it. Change is scary, especially when you've worked so hard to build something you care about. But pushing people around isn't the answer. You don't have to agree with me, but respecting boundaries is important." Karen nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I know I messed up. Can we start over? Maybe find a way to work together instead of against each other." It was a turning point. The new neighbor considered Karen's words carefully. While she still disagreed with many of the HOA's practices, she recognized an opportunity to mend fences and create a better environment for everyone. So, she offered a compromise. "Here's what I propose," she said. "You step down as HOA president immediately. We need fresh leadership, someone who prioritizes inclusivity and collaboration rather than exclusion and control. In return, I'll hold off on any rezoning plans and work with whoever takes your place to ensure the community thrives." Karen hesitated for only a second before nodding. "Deal," she whispered. Within days, notices went out announcing major changes to the HOA structure. Elections were scheduled to choose a new president, and committees formed to revise outdated bylaws. For the first time in years, residents felt like their voices mattered. Even Karen, humbled by the experience, volunteered to help organize events and beautification projects aimed at rebuilding trust. As for the new neighbor, she finally found peace. With tensions easing and relationships improving, she settled into the life she'd always imagined by the lake. And while she kept her investments close to her chest, she also embraced her role as a catalyst for positive change. Little did she know, her actions had sparked something much bigger, a renewed sense of unity among neighbors who once struggled to coexist. With Karen stepping down as HOA president, the lakeside community entered a period of transition. It wasn't just about replacing her leadership, it was about rebuilding trust and finding ways to work together. For years, Karen's strict enforcement of rules had created an atmosphere where people were afraid to speak up or challenge decisions. Now, with fresh faces taking charge, there was hope that things could change for the better. The first step in this transformation came during the HOA elections. Several neighbors threw their hats into the ring, eager to bring new ideas and energy to the table. One candidate stood out, a retired schoolteacher named Linda. She wasn't loud or flashy, but she had a reputation for being kind, level-headed, and fair. Most importantly, she believed in collaboration rather than control. When she gave her speech at the election meeting, it resonated deeply with everyone present. "We're not here to dictate how others live," Linda said, addressing the crowd. "We're here to support each other and make sure our neighborhood remains a place we all love. That means listening, not lecturing, and working together to solve problems." Her words struck a chord. The vote was unanimous. Linda became the new HOA president. Her first order of business? Forming committees to tackle long-standing issues like parking disputes, shared amenities, and landscaping maintenance. Instead of imposing rigid rules, these groups encouraged input from all residents, including those who weren't part of the HOA. Slowly but surely, the divide between members and non-members began to shrink. Karen, meanwhile, kept a low profile after stepping down. At first, some neighbors worried she might try to sabotage the changes behind the scenes. But to everyone's surprise, she seemed genuinely committed to making amends. She threw herself into volunteer work, helping organize social events and spearheading cleanup drives around the lake. It wasn't easy for her. Letting go of power never is, but she knew it was necessary if she wanted to repair the damage she'd caused. One afternoon, the new neighbor noticed Karen hauling bags of mulch to plant flowers near the entrance sign. Curious, she walked over and offered to help. They worked side by side in silence for a while before Karen finally spoke. "I owe you more than just an apology," she admitted, brushing dirt off her hands. "You didn't have to give me a second chance, but you did. I won't forget that." The new neighbor smiled. "Everyone deserves a chance to do better," she replied simply. "Besides, I think you've earned it." Over time, small gestures like this helped mend fences. People who once avoided Karen now greeted her warmly. She even joined one of the committees, offering insights based on her years of experience without insisting they follow her every suggestion. Watching her evolve from a domineering figure to someone willing to listen and adapt inspired others to let go of old grudges too. Meanwhile, the new neighbor continued playing a quiet but vital role in shaping the community's future. True to her word, she put any rezoning plans on hold and focused instead on fostering cooperation. She attended committee meetings, shared feedback, and encouraged open dialogue between HOA members and non-members alike. Her presence reminded everyone that progress required patience and compromise, not ultimatums. One evening, the HOA hosted its first big event under the new leadership, a summer picnic by the lake. Tables were set up under colorful umbrellas, kids ran around playing tag, and adults mingled over plates of homemade food. Music played softly in the background as laughter filled the air. It was a stark contrast to the tense gatherings of the past, where arguments often overshadowed camaraderie. Linda stood at the center of it all, beaming with pride as she watched her neighbors interact. "This is what it's supposed to feel like," she said to the new neighbor, who stood nearby sipping lemonade. "People coming together because they want to, not because they're forced to." "It's a good start," the new neighbor agreed. "But there's still work to do." And she was right. While the community had come a long way, old habits die hard. Some neighbors still clung to outdated notions of perfection, resisting efforts to loosen restrictions. Others remained skeptical of the HOA altogether, unsure if the changes would last. But for the first time in years, there was momentum toward something positive. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden reflections across the water, the new neighbor found herself reflecting on everything that had happened. Moving to the lake had been a leap of faith, one that tested her patience, resilience, and ability to stand her ground. Yet it also taught her valuable lessons about human nature, that fear can drive people to act irrationally, but compassion has the power to heal wounds. She glanced across the picnic area and saw Karen chatting animatedly with another neighbor. There was no trace of the cold, controlling woman she'd met months ago. In her place was someone really trying to be better. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. That night, as fireworks lit up the sky to celebrate the end of the picnic, the new neighbor felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The road ahead wouldn't always be smooth, but she believed in the potential of this community. Together, they had taken the first steps toward creating a space where everyone felt welcome, even those who chose not to join the HOA. Months had passed since the lakeside community began its journey toward healing. The HOA meetings were no longer battlegrounds of tension and resentment, but spaces where neighbors genuinely listened to one another. Linda, the new president, had done an incredible job fostering a spirit of teamwork and understanding. Even Karen, once the self-appointed enforcer of perfection, had found her place as a helper rather than a ruler. But while things seemed peaceful on the surface, everyone knew that real change took time, and sometimes, old habits could creep back in when least expected. One crisp autumn morning, the new neighbor woke up early to enjoy her coffee by the lake. She loved this time of year, the way the leaves turned fiery shades of red and gold, the cool breeze carrying the scent of wood smoke from chimneys nearby. It felt like everything was falling into place. Her home was finally becoming the sanctuary she'd dreamed of, and the neighborhood was starting to feel less like a battleground and more like a true community. But just as she settled into the rhythm of her quiet routine, something unexpected happened. A letter arrived in her mailbox, a formal notice from the county planning department. Someone had filed a petition to rezone a large section of land near the lake, including several properties owned by the HOA and some privately held lots. At first glance, it didn't seem directly related to her. But then she noticed something strange. The proposal suggested turning parts of the area into commercial zones, complete with parking lots and retail spaces. Her heart sank. This wasn't what she wanted for the neighborhood. Sure, she had hinted at rezoning possibilities during her showdown with Karen, but only as a last resort to protect herself and send a message about fairness. Now, it seemed someone else had picked up the idea and run with it, possibly without considering how it might affect the community. Determined to get to the bottom of things, she called Linda, who promised to look into it immediately. Together, they discovered that the petition had been submitted by an outside developer, someone unconnected to the neighborhood who saw potential profit in transforming the serene lakeside setting into a bustling hub of activity. News of the proposal spread quickly among residents, sparking panic and outrage. At the next HOA meeting, emotions ran high. Some neighbors argued that allowing development would ruin the charm of the area forever. Others pointed out that rejecting the plan outright might lead to legal battles or even force them to sell their homes if property values plummeted. For the first time since Linda took over, unity within the community began to fracture. Karen, surprisingly, stepped forward to offer a solution. "We've all made mistakes," she said, addressing the room. "And I'm probably the biggest example of that. But right now, we need to focus on what's best for everyone, not just ourselves. Let's find a way to negotiate with the developer. Maybe there's middle ground." Her suggestion caught everyone off guard, especially given her history of rigidity. But instead of dismissing her, the group decided to give it a shot. They formed a task force including both HOA members and non-members to meet with the developer and explore alternatives. The new neighbor joined too, lending her expertise in real estate negotiations. The talks weren't easy. The developer was firm in his intentions, insisting that the proposed changes would benefit the local economy. But the task force refused to back down. They presented counter-arguments, highlighting the unique character of the neighborhood and emphasizing the importance of preserving it. Slowly, through hours of discussions and compromises, they reached a tentative agreement. The developer would scale back his plans significantly, focusing on a small strip of land farther away from the lake. In exchange, the community agreed to support certain upgrades, like improved roads and better access to public facilities. When the revised proposal went public, reactions were mixed. Not everyone was thrilled, but most agreed it was the best possible outcome under the circumstances. More importantly, the process brought neighbors closer together. Working side by side to protect their shared home reminded them of what truly mattered, looking out for each other. As winter approached, the lakeside community celebrated another milestone, an annual holiday gathering hosted jointly by the HOA and its non-member neighbors. Strings of lights twinkled along rooftops, and laughter echoed across the frozen lake. Children built snowmen while adults exchanged stories around bonfires. For the first time in years, the celebration felt inclusive and joyful, free from underlying tensions. The new neighbor stood by the water's edge, watching the festivities unfold. She thought about how far they'd come from hostility and mistrust to cooperation and friendship. It hadn't been easy, and there were still challenges ahead. But she believed in the strength of the bonds they'd forged. Linda walked over, holding 2 cups of hot chocolate. "Here," she said, handing one to the new neighbor. "You deserve this." "Thanks," the woman replied with a smile. "It's amazing how much has changed." It's because of people like you, Linda said. You didn't have to stick around after everything that happened. But you did. And you helped us see that being a community isn't about rules, it's about caring for each other. The words touched her deeply. She realized that standing her ground hadn't just been about protecting herself, it had sparked a ripple effect, inspiring others to rethink their priorities and work toward a common goal. As the night wore on, Karen approached her hesitantly. I know I'll never fully make up for what I did, she said softly. But I want you to know I'm glad you're here. You've taught me a lot. The new neighbor nodded. We've all learned something from this. That's what makes it worthwhile. In the end, the lakeside community wasn't perfect. There were still disagreements, moments of frustration, and lingering doubts. But those imperfections made it real, human. What mattered most was that they faced challenges together, choosing kindness over conflict and collaboration over division. As fireworks lit up the sky to mark the start of the new year, the new neighbor felt a deep sense of gratitude. This place, her home, had tested her in ways she never imagined. Yet it had also shown her the power of resilience, forgiveness, and hope. And as she gazed at the shimmering reflection of the fireworks on the water, she knew one thing for certain: no matter what lay ahead, they would face it as a united community.